Welcome to Sci-Fi Quantum Archives. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and explore. The tremor came without warning. No warning sirens, no foreshocks. Just a deep groan beneath the rock that startled sleeping dogs in mountain villages and sent thin plumes of dust rising from the stone. Locals didn't panic. The Andes breathe often. But this breath was different. It shifted something old. A crack tore through a forgotten ridge 20 miles east of Arequipa, slicing through a limestone vein like soft fruit. When the shaking stopped, the cliffside held its breath. At dawn, 3 field geologists, contracted by a mining survey, hiked up to investigate. The youngest among them noticed the irregular reflection first. Not sunlight on water, not ice. A dull, unwavering gleam inside a newly exposed rock face. They didn't speak much as they cleared the debris. The formation wasn't right. Geodes don't form in perfect spheres, and they certainly don't hum. This one did, low, constant, almost like pressure behind the eyes. When they cracked it open, they found no crystals. Only one. Suspended in quartz, floating as if untouched by time, was a human brain. No tissue decay. No signs of surgical embedding. No oxygen bubbles, no fractures. The quartz was flawless. The folds of the cortex pressed lightly against the mineral casing, like it had been poured around it in liquid form and cooled without a single fissure. One of the geologists reached out, pulled his hand back before touching it. Not out of fear. Something quieter than that. Reverence. Or recognition he couldn't explain. The brain was transported under military escort to a temporary clean lab in Lima. Photos were restricted. The team signed non-disclosure agreements before boarding the plane. No one said the word impossible, but every face wore it. It wasn't until the second day of scanning that the EEG spiked. The technician ran the tests twice, blamed interference, swapped the array, rechecked every lead. The pattern repeated. Alpha waves. Theta activity. Event-related potentials. The signature was clear. No seizure behavior. No flatline. The brain was awake. A sleep researcher was brought in under pretense. She lasted 5 minutes before asking to see the raw data. Asked if this was a prank. Asked if the brain was synthetic. Asked if anyone had tried speaking to it. The lead geologist sat outside the glass enclosure that night, watching it. The quartz glowed faintly under the low lab lights, as though responding to the machines. He stared at the grooves and whorls of the preserved tissue, trying to convince himself that what he saw wasn't familiarity, but pareidolia. Just pattern recognition. Just his brain reaching for something it could name. On the third day, the pulses shifted again. Stronger. More regular. As if adjusting to being watched. As if aware. No one slept. No one spoke loudly in the lab. Some began muting their phones instinctively. One technician insisted she heard something faint in the EEG feedback. A rhythm, like language heard underwater. She was sent home for exhaustion. She didn't come back. By the 7th day, it was no longer being studied. It was being observed. The hum in the quartz had grown. It couldn't be recorded. Microphones picked up nothing. But everyone who stood within 10 feet felt it in their skull. Like a low-pressure system moving behind the bones. At night, the light inside the casing changed. A faint shimmer, not pulsing, not reflective. Steady. Patient. Till. The head neurologist made a note in her journal that evening. Not for publication. Just a thought. If this thing is thinking, what could it be thinking about? No one dared ask the second question. What could it be remembering? The transfer to Geneva was done without declaration. No customs, no crates. Just a single air-sealed transport pod, escorted under diplomatic immunity by individuals who didn't share titles or make conversation. The object was no longer in the care of scientists. It had become property. Inside the Level 5 isolation chamber, light moved differently. Not through design, but through presence. Quartz refracted the lab's halogens into subtle patterns that shifted without source. Technicians stopped commenting after the 3rd day. Not because it ceased, but because explaining it aloud made it harder to stay grounded. The first biopsies were proposed and rejected within hours. No invasive measures. No disruption. The mandate was strict. Observe, do not alter. Instead, they mapped it. Full surface lattice scan, atomic resonance imaging, cross-sectional mapping of synaptic structure. Biological confirmation came on day 6. Human brain tissue. No edits, no engineered sequences, no foreign proteins. Standard neuroanatomy, gyri, sulci, vascular remains. Every contour matched known morphology. But the casing disobeyed all timelines. Crystallization analysis returned an age that no one read aloud when it came through. 50 million years. Double-checked. Triple-checked. Inclusions dated the same. Pressure ridges consistent with a geologic event from the Eocene epoch. Before primates carried tools. Before the continents settled into recognition. Before memory had an author. One lab assistant resigned without notice that morning. She didn't speak to anyone. Left her badge on the counter, caught the train east, never answered follow-up. When asked why, the only thing she'd written was a single sentence in her notebook. It doesn't feel old. It feels recent. Temperature logs recorded something irregular by week's end. The interior of the quartz maintained a stable internal temperature, several degrees higher than the chamber's controls. No source. No gradient. It simply held warmth. The neurophysiologist brought in from Marseille noted a strange pattern in the wave activity. Not language, not noise. Something closer to cadence. She likened it to breathing. Slow, rhythmic, intentional. When asked for elaboration, she refused to discuss it further. Late one evening, a sleep disorder specialist from Zurich monitored the waveform consistency for anomalies. Every 94 minutes, the pattern dipped into something that resembled REM state. Not identical. Slower. More ordered. Like memory without emotion. Dreaming without chaos. He watched the printout for 6 straight hours, annotated each cycle, then walked into the break room and vomited twice into the sink. His only comment to the team was that the waveform looked familiar. When asked how, he said it was the same as his daughter's, during her final sleep before the seizure. This was not coma behavior. Not hibernation. It resembled intent. Not active thought, but readiness. One geochemist from the original field team visited the lab under supervision. He wasn't invited into the clean chamber. He stood behind the glass, hands in his coat pockets, eyes on the form inside. He didn't blink for a full minute. When asked what he saw, he said it hadn't changed. Not since Peru. Not since that first moment. Not the brain. Not the light. Not the sense that time, here, moved outward instead of forward. The lab kept silent on its findings. Not out of secrecy, but absence. Reports were written, sent, buried. But the words had no weight. No frame of reference. 50 million years of silence could not be translated into modern language. The EEG continued. No acceleration. No deterioration. Just presence. Something was awake. Something had been awake for longer than the Earth had known memory. And it had not forgotten anything. The invitations came without explanations. No formal requests, no institutional approvals. Each was contacted through unofficial channels, their travel arranged before consent was given. Refusal wasn't considered. One spent the flight from Santiago staring at the back of the seat in front of him, thumb pressed against a pocket notebook that remained unopened. Another kept her ID badge turned backward throughout the layover in Frankfurt, lips dry from silence. None were told who else had been selected. None were told what they were being brought into. Only that their presence was necessary and overdue. The room they entered was cold but not sterile. No projection screens, no briefing packets. Just a central monitor looping data that didn't belong in any known field. They stood without speaking, eyes tracing waveforms they couldn't interpret. No introductions. Only the question, felt but unspoken, why these 4? One came from the tectonic surveys in Chile, known for unorthodox fieldwork and a refusal to publish speculative models. His hands bore small burn scars from an expedition gone wrong. He noticed the seismic overlays first. The layering didn't match any known uplift patterns. The fault line wasn't natural. Another walked with the posture of someone who had spent too many years around machines that outpaced her own mind. Her notes were handwritten in dense cursive, lines stacked edge to edge, thoughts nested within thoughts. She paused longest at the neurological graphs, fingers pressed lightly to her own temple as if measuring comparison. The third arrived late, coat soaked from the sleet outside, shoes scuffed from sprinting across an unfamiliar tarmac. He asked no questions. He had seen crystal formations in the Urals that had changed the way he understood time. But nothing like this. He stared not at the specimen, but at the lab's light, watching how it behaved near the chamber's edge. The final figure remained furthest from the group, her eyes fixed not on the object but the people observing it. Her field was fossil inheritance, DNA fragments carried through extinction event. She had spent years studying teeth older than language. Yet what sat before her defied lineage. No erosion, no mineral creep, as if life had been paused, not preserved. They were told only what was measurable. The tissue was human. The casing was quartz. The EEG signatures persisted without decline. The object had not been altered since discovery. The containment systems were stable. No intervention had occurred. None of it mattered. Each came from disciplines that didn't intersect. Their specialties were precise, non-redundant. One mapped tectonic memory. One translated cortical resonance. One read crystalline growth like history. One extracted bloodlines from silence. No collaboration made sense unless the subject required understanding across deep material, deep time, and something beneath both. What connected them was not knowledge. It was familiarity. Not with each other, but with the quality of phenomena that refused to behave. One began sketching the EEG pulses by hand. Not to analyze, but to listen. The spacing between waves resembled early musical notation. The rhythm obeyed no known biological function. Not seizure, not stress, not coma. Just sequence. Measured. Repeating. Not perfectly. Like something recalling, not repeating. Another noticed a distortion in the spectrometry readout. Light absorbed, then redirected at a microscopic delay. The delay matched a biological timescale, not geological. No natural crystal had ever shown latency in the picosecond range. The group didn't speak often. When they did, their voices stayed low, as though afraid to disturb something not asleep but resting. Not in darkness, but in waiting. The second week passed without incident, but with consequence. Their personal clocks began to drift. One reported waking up 3 minutes before alarms, without fail. Another began hearing certain consonants echoed faintly in the lab's silent hallways. Not hallucinations. Not misfires. Traces of perception forming too early, or lingering too long. They were not being told what to find. They were being asked what they already knew and had forgotten. No one asked who selected them. No one asked what came next. Each understood, in private, that discovery was not the assignment. It was recognition. Not what the brain was, but what it had once been. And what, somehow, it still remembered. The waveforms no longer resembled noise. Not static, not the aimless tremble of decaying cells. The lines moved with precision, curved with consistency. On the fourth day of synchronized monitoring, the baseline shifted upward. Not a spike. A posture. Like someone straightening their back before speaking. Neural oscillation aligned with the range known for alertness. Eyes open. Breath regular. Not dreaming. Not resting. Fully aware. One of the technicians stopped recording after 30 minutes. She watched the graph without blinking, pulse steady, mouth dry. No alerts were triggered. No irregularities breached threshold. Yet something in the rhythm unnerved her. Too structured. Too still. Like a drum beat measured against an absent metronome. The team tried conversion. Wave patterns rendered into audio tones produced sequences that repeated at uneven intervals. The timing matched early phonemic structures. Vowels emerged from frequency clusters. Certain consonant shapes echoed in the gap. Not speech, not language, but the shape of both. Attempts to isolate the origin within the brain failed. The activity did not travel along expected neural pathways. No hemispheric division, no lobe-specific engagement. The entire mass lit up in unison, like a choir where no voice led. The crystallographer began sketching the frequency bursts by hand, turning them into lines, arcs, points on translucent film. Plotted against the quartz lattice, certain alignments appeared too often to ignore. Peaks in signal intensity mirrored fracture planes. Pressure seams in the mineral matched pauses in signal output. As if the brain had grown around its prison, or the prison had formed in its image. Hours were spent feeding the sequences into syntax engines, decryption tools, linguistic models. Nothing fit. Until the neurobiologist proposed a reversal. Instead of reading the signals as output, she treated them as compression. Like thoughts stored for long travel. When inverted and expanded, one burst contained a pattern that matched early symbolic markings from antediluvian cave sites. Not a perfect match. Just similar enough to unsettle. The idea surfaced quietly. Not from belief, but fatigue. Perhaps it wasn't thinking. Perhaps it was remembering. Not the kind of memory shaped by days and hours. Not narrative. Not visual. Deeper. Older. The kind of memory that precedes language. Shape. Terrain. Impact. The mind recalling the way light once struck a canopy before continents moved. The sound of wind before there were ears to hear it. They stopped running continuous analysis after the 17th cycle. The same sequence emerged each time. Not variation, not growth. Stability. It repeated like prayer. Not to be understood, but preserved. A linguist was brought in for a second opinion. He listened to the translated audio once, sat back in his chair, and asked why no one was discussing the rhythm. Not the content, the pace. He called it performative silence. The pauses were too perfect, intentional, like someone reciting from memory rather than composing new thought. He was dismissed the next day without explanation. His notes were archived but not opened. The waveform persisted, steady, relentless, as though the mind inside had no need to respond. It simply broadcast, like a beacon, not asking to be found, but refusing to be forgotten. Each cycle began with the same burst, a curve that resembled a breath, not air intake, anticipation, the kind of stillness before speech, when a thought prepares to become sound. Except no sound came. Only presence. Only the rhythm of something older than speech remembering how to wait. The overnight rotation was quiet, as always. Most of the staff left before the second hand crossed midnight. Only essential personnel remained, those trusted enough to sit with the hum, the slow pulse of signal that never ceased. She wasn't on the main roster. Contracted for systems monitoring, not research. Her shifts rarely included contact with the specimen. She liked the silence, liked the absence of protocol once the lab lights dimmed and the corridors emptied of speculation. At 3:17, she spoke aloud. Not to herself. Not to anyone in particular. Just words, soft, steady, paced like recitation. No one heard it at first. Audio logs picked it up later. Language detection software flagged nothing. It wasn't until the morning review that someone noticed the rhythm was wrong. Too structured. Too consistent. Not random speech. Not dreaming aloud. She didn't remember the recording. Claimed no knowledge of what she'd said. When the audio was played back, she recognized the sound but not the meaning. Just phonemes. But her voice carried certainty. No hesitation. No search for words. As if reading from a place she couldn't name. A linguist brought in under a separate project overheard the playback and stopped moving. He asked to hear it again. Then again, slower. His notes were sparse but specific. The syntax matched known reconstructions of a Proto-Indo-European root dialect, one predating agriculture, predating metallurgy. Dead longer than writing had lived. She didn't sleep well that day. Kept waking with her hands curled around the edges of the mattress, breathing shallow, as though tracking movement just outside reach. Her reports described the same dream on 3 consecutive nights. Dense foliage, heavy air, no birds. Silence pressed into the canopy like weight. She moved through trees too tall to measure, tracking something large ahead of her. Not predator, not prey. Just scale. She knew where to place her feet. Knew how to hold the spear. Not as an idea, but as memory. The muscles remembered. The spine adjusted. The hunt had happened. One morning, she brought in a sketch made on hotel stationery. Trees bending into themselves. Clouds low and still. A reptile half hidden behind a fallen trunk, body long, tail lifted, eyes aware. She swore she'd never drawn anything in her life. Sleep study equipment was installed in her quarters. She agreed without protest. Brain scans showed REM patterns matching the EEG signature from the Quartz. Not identical, but in phase. Her dreams began at the same moment the artifact's signal dipped. The overlap grew each night. 2 systems, once separate, now moving in rhythm. Language fluency increased. Not through study. Through habit. She began responding in it without notice, sometimes mid-sentence, reverting back with no awareness. One researcher heard her humming between observations, melody untraceable, tone steady. When asked what the tune was, she said it was used to call others back from the outer hills after the storms. No one asked which hills, or when. The recordings continued, each one clearer than the last. Syntax formed structure. Verbs shaped around experience. The language held no term for future. Only events that would return. She was transferred off-site without announcement. Her badge deactivated within hours. No final briefings, no debrief. Her belongings were boxed, unopened. Her notebooks left behind, filled with diagrams of plants not found in current catalogs. Names written in symbols no one could trace. Each labeled in a script that hadn't existed in 10,000 years. Her departure wasn't logged. The system marked her as inactive, without timestamp. When asked about the change, the only official statement offered was that she had not changed. Only remembered. What had spoken through her was not possession. It was retrieval. Not a message sent. A memory returned. She didn't speak during the meeting. Not at first. Let the others measure pulse intervals, map acoustic resonance, argue over whether the signals counted as conscious intent. No interruptions, no disagreement. Only listening. Watching how they circled it. How they insisted on finding something alive. She waited until the room emptied. Brought no new data, only her own quiet. The quartz didn't pulse. It didn't radiate. It held. Not heat, not light. Something older. Stillness with direction. Not inert. Preserved. But not like amber or ice. No moment frozen. No trauma paused. What lay inside was still moving, just at a pace so slow it escaped detection unless you stopped trying to measure it. Her notes were precise. Not poetic. Not abstract. Just one sentence, written clearly across the center of the page. It's not alive. It's looping. Not circulation. Not feedback. A pattern sealed inside itself, repeating without awareness of its repetition. Like a song recorded on a closed reel, left to play in silence across the reach of eons. No metabolic output. No cell renewal. No waste. But cognition. Firing across preserved tissue in an order so consistent it resisted randomness. Not static. Not decline. This wasn't survival. It was memory held in perfect conditions, untouched by decay or time. The idea took root not as theory, but inevitability. What they called consciousness might not need biology. It only needed enough structure, enough signal fidelity. The quartz had done more than encase a brain. It had insulated its function. A geologic capsule around a neural rhythm that refused to end. She studied the signal over 7 days. No variation. Every wave matched the one before it. Even the anomalies returned right on time. Not errors. Features. Each one replayed at the exact same position, without drift, without loss. Like dreams committed not to chance but architecture. Others tried to disprove it. Pointed out that loops break. That feedback fails. That no structure, however stable, resists entropy. But they were thinking in decades. Centuries. Even the tools they used were designed around death. None of them knew how to speak about something designed not to live forever, but to remember forever. Fossils hold shape. Crystals hold light. But this held time. No respiration. No hunger. No desire. Only continuity. Thought repeating not from boredom or damage, but intention. A consciousness with no need for the world. No need for anything except the return of itself to itself. Every previous theory had assumed awareness must emerge. This one had not emerged. It had persisted. When asked whether it could still think, she answered too quietly for the recorder to catch the word. But the technician standing nearest wrote them down later, exactly as they were spoken. It doesn't think. It remains. The others debated transmission. Whether the pulses were broadcast. Whether the dreams meant leakage, infection, contamination. But the question was wrong. This wasn't a signal reaching out. It wasn't trying to be heard. It had already spoken. Long before language. Long before humans shaped myths to explain the silence. This was not consciousness reawakened. It was consciousness that had never gone away. She sat with the signal long past her assigned hours. Not out of obligation. Not curiosity. Something quieter, more personal. A kind of listening that required no headphones, no interpretation. Just presence. The waveform hadn't changed. Still the same pulses, same rhythmic curves, same density of silence between each cluster. But silence held weight, and weight held shape. She began isolating segments not for their intensity, but their pattern. Loops within loops. Refrains. The signal moved like something that had form before language. Not thought. Recollection. She didn't try to decode the signal directly. She mirrored it. Ran modeling software designed to interpret neural sequences as pre-visual memory state. Tools never meant for this. The output stuttered at first, grain, noise, static. But within the artifacts, fragments began to emerge. Not pictures. Impressions. An atmosphere. A temperature. Shapes born from memory, not physics. She filtered the noise again. Sharpened only what repeated. The algorithm stabilized. A consistent image began to form. A sky, dimmer than Earth's, colored like stones soaked in rust. 2 moons. One whole, one fractured. Hanging low, neither bright. Light came from the horizon, not above. As though the sun had long since pulled away but left its reflection. She printed the image without annotation. Left it in the conference room without explanation. No one questioned its origin. The next fragment was slower to reveal. Movement across the lower spectrum, edges, shadows, vertical mass. Not natural. Built. Stone worked by tools, but not modern ones. Temples. Not by name, not by use. Structures pressed into cliff walls, edges smooth, entrances narrow, shaped for height. No inscription. No icons. Just lines. Straight, clean, rising. She increased the predictive frame rate. More emerged. Cityscapes, if they could be called that. Shapes repeating not for efficiency, but memory. Towers reflecting not sunlight, but one another. Structures grown from minerals unfamiliar to the system. Nothing fractured. No sign of collapse. Still standing. The stone didn't weather. The light didn't shift. The images carried no time. Only recurrence. She labeled the set cognitive artifact. Not hallucinations. Not invention. Neural imprints left behind by experience so deeply engraved they became visual residue. A kind of fossilization, not of bone, but sight. Other researchers treated the prints like speculative art. Projections from corrupted input. No proof of origin, no provenance, but she kept watching, frame by frame, shape by shape, not seeking confirmation, seeking rhythm. The cities never change. Their layout identical across different bursts. The moons stayed fixed. The sky held the same hue. These weren't dreams. Dreams deform. These remained. A geologist glanced at one of the prints during a passing discussion. He paused at the striations in the cliffside, said nothing for a moment, then pointed to the lower sediment curve. Said he'd seen something like it once. Not above ground. In a buried canyon 5 miles beneath the Kalahari. Structure embedded in the rock face. He hadn't known what to make of it. She didn't react. Didn't need to. The quartz wasn't holding memories. It was holding place. The mind inside hadn't forgotten where it had been. It was showing it piece by piece. Not as a message, but as the only thing it knew how to do. Return. To the moons. To the stone. To the cities that never age. To the sky that never changed. The logs weren't labeled. No project code. No institutional stamp. Just dates, most of them smudged, some erased completely. Found behind a sealed cabinet during a storage audit no one recalled authorizing. The files were analog. Paper. A decade before digital redundancy became standard. There were no names inside. No signatures. Only titles. Sensor lead. Cognitive analyst. Site oversight. The language was clinical at first. Notations on cave depth, atmospheric irregularities, magnetometer distortion. All centered around an expedition site in northern Algeria. Deep limestone fault. Unstable layers. Abandoned for safety reasons. That was the official account. The entries told a different story. Beneath the geological mapping, beneath the environmental risk assessments, a second layer emerged. E.g. anomalies. Readings retrieved not from people, but the rock itself. Mineral seams carrying signal. Low-frequency pulses not attributed to tectonic. Unresponsive to external interference. Recurring in patterns no one could trace. The analysts weren't prepared for neurological data. The equipment had been intended for topographic mapping. But the readings continued. Regular. Rhythmic. Increasing in coherence as excavation progressed. The first serious entry came on the 6th night. A technician reported confusion in speech. Not stammering. Substitution. Familiar words replaced with unknown ones, spoken without hesitation. Reviewed recordings confirmed it. The technician was unaware. When confronted, no memory of the incident remained. By day 9, 4 members reported identical dreams. Large open caverns. Glyphs on walls that pulsed in rhythm with breath. Shapes that didn't move but suggested movement. Air too still. Sound that moved through stone without echo. The logs turned sparse after that. Language shifted. Sentences shortened. As if the writer struggled to hold structure. One phrase began to repeat. Not in conclusion. Mid-sentence. Between technical note. In margins. Across unrelated observations. Continuity must never be broken. No further explanation was given. It appeared in handwriting from multiple individuals. Some entries began with it. Others ended there. One report, unrelated to EEG data, contained nothing else. The final entry gave no date. Only a single paragraph, written in what looked like haste. Graphite pressure uneven. Letters smudged at the edges. It stated that the site had been sealed. That no further excavation would be allowed. That the chamber had shown signs of awareness. Not reaction. Awareness. The last line repeated the phrase a third time. Continuity must never be broken. The phrase didn't function like a warning. It wasn't framed as caution. It carried weight without threat. Like instruction remembered rather than given. Those reviewing the logs didn't speak during the first read-through. There was nothing to debate. The EEG anomalies matched those currently being observed. Down to the pulse intervals. Down to the residual cadence during signal plateaus. There had been another mind once. Buried. Found. Forgotten. Not because of failure. because of refusal. No one had followed up on the original site. No publication. No citation. The people involved had disappeared from institutional records after the year closed. Not redacted. Erased. The phrase became a reference point. Without discussion, it entered their vocabulary. Used to end meetings. Used to acknowledge understanding when no other words fit. Not superstition. Not comfort. Something more physical. A reminder. Whatever had been preserved was not an accident. Not survival. Continuity had a structure. And that structure was not theirs to interrupt. The team stopped asking what the quartz chamber wanted. It had never asked. It had remained. For as long as memory could stay whole. Whatever else they did, they would not sever that. Continuity must never be broken. No warning preceded the change. No tremor in the signal. No shift in temperature. The pulse that had remained steady for weeks held its form a moment longer than expected. Not longer in time, longer in weight. A fraction stretched past familiarity, and in that stretch the entire rhythm altered. Every monitor surged into perfect alignment. Not noise. Not overload. A symmetry too exact to simulate. Brainwave coherence across all measurable frequencies. Delta through gamma. No lag. No phase conflict. Total synchrony. A pattern more precise than any known biological state. Inside the containment chamber, the quartz no longer refracted light. It refracted movement. The room itself slowed. Surfaces blurred at the edges. Shadows softened. The casing didn't brighten. It clarified, as if the air around it had been dusted clean, revealing something that had always been present but only now visible. One technician stood closest to the glass, body still, breath held without intention. She didn't speak. Her eyes didn't blink. Her posture mirrored the waveform. The light did not radiate. It surrounded. Not luminous. Not blinding. A clarity that reached into bone. Every outline became sharper, not in form, but in meaning. Objects felt remembered. Rooms felt returned to. No alarms sounded. No protocols initiated. Because nothing breached containment. Nothing escaped. The quartz held. The brain within did not pulse. It remained. But the waveforms expanded outward. Not in amplitude. In reach. Readouts on surrounding equipment registered shifts in unrelated systems. Power nodes fluctuated in rhythm. Clocks slowed, aligned, reset. Mechanical devices synced to patterns they were not built to recognize. Inside each observer, something yielded. Not broken. Not taken. Yielded. Like stepping aside for a memory too large to pass through uninvited. There was no pressure. No pain. No resistance. The sound in the room was silence. But it was not empty. It pressed into the lungs as if air had learned intention. What passed between the quartz and the room did not carry instruction. No vision. No voice. No knowledge made new. Only recognition. A return so complete it no longer required origin. One by one, the team lowered their gaze. Not from reverence. Not fear. As if the impulse to look had completed its purpose. Something had passed. The EEG monitors held their coherence for 27 minutes. During that time, no one moved. Not by force. By necessity. When the signal began to taper, it did not fade. It stepped back. A retreat not of presence, but expression. As if having spoken everything it had, it returned to stillness. The light in the room did not recede. It became ordinary again. In the hours that followed, none of them reported what they had seen. Because there had been no vision. Only knowing. The language barriers returned. The accents. The private thoughts. But underneath each was a rhythm. Barely detectable. Present in breath, in pause, in the small space between words where silence lingers. It had not sent a message. It had completed a transfer. There was no contact. There had never needed to be. Because the object in the quartz was not waiting to be discovered. It had remained whole until something could carry it forward. They hadn't found it. They became it. Thank you for watching and sticking with me to the end. Now, if you believe humanity deserves a future among the stars, do subscribe now. Only those who'd abandon Earth to its fate will scroll past.